Hey, what's up everybody? Today is Monday, June 8th, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the PPP Flexibility Act that was signed into law by Donald Trump over the weekend. Now I know I've made a few videos about this in the past, but I do want to get into more specifics about payroll forgiveness. But before I do that, I would love it if you guys would hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already to keep updated to all things SBA, EIDL, PPP, all that crap. I'm going to be posting videos every day, so please subscribe, please like this video to let the YouTube algorithms do its thing. Also, I wanted to mention that in the description below, I'm going to have a link to my Facebook group where I try to keep people updated more regularly than my YouTube videos, because I only have time for one video a day. So if you join my Facebook group, we're all trying to support each other there. It's a great resource for you. So check it out in the description below. Also, I'd love it if you can comment below on how you're doing, how your city is doing, with COVID-19. Now we have protests and riots and stuff like that. Please just let me know how you're doing, and maybe we can figure something out, like if we can help you in any way, or you just need some kind of support. But yeah, feel free to let me know. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your updates. So today I'm going to be talking about the PPP Flexibility Act and how it's changed the payroll forgiveness portion. And also I'm going to be talking about self-employed folks and what this means for you guys. Stay tuned for the whole video. I'll get to the self-employed folks towards the end here. But first, the main thing that I'm going to talk about is the changes to the payroll portions through the PPP Flexibility Act. So as you know, before this act passed, it was a 75% minimum payroll requirement in order to get your loan forgiven, at least fully forgiven. They changed that number from 75 to 60% minimum requirement, which is a much more flexible number. However, there's one thing that I haven't heard talked about much, is that now if you don't meet the 60% requirement, you don't get any of your loan forgiven. Whereas before, if you don't meet the 75% requirement, you can still get some forgiven, it's just going to be reduced. But now, if you don't meet the 60%, zero forgiven. So a really important thing to keep in mind. Now that you probably will be able to more easily meet that 60% now, because they've also increased the covered period from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, which is 3 times longer. You have 3 times longer to spend your money on qualified expenses. That is a huge news, because there are some businesses that are still closed. At least in Denver, bars and nightclubs are still closed. And in order to effectively use the PPP, they need that extended period, which is a huge deal for them. Why it's also a big deal is because they will less likely have to compete with federal and state unemployment. Because as you know, federal unemployment is so good that people would just prefer to stay on unemployment rather than work. So now, with federal unemployment possibly ending July 31st, there's talks of a little bit of extension, or at least a reduced amount extension, but possibly ending July 31st, businesses will less likely have to compete with that. Now, I've been getting some questions about people who have been following the 8-week covered period guideline, and they changed it to 24 weeks, and they're just worried now that they have to wait 24 weeks at least to apply for forgiveness, or maybe the Paycheck Protection Program was only enough to float them through 8 weeks, and then they might have to re-furlough or re-lay off their employees. Just want to let you know that you can still elect the 8-week covered period if you wish. You're not forced into the 24-week period. You can still do 8 weeks. Now there's also some talk about the FTE calculation. That's the full-time equivalency calculation. Now, as you know, under the old rule, if you have 5 employees before the crisis, you need to hire, or at least have 5 employees before you apply for forgiveness, right? It's the FTE requirement. It means that you rehire your old employees that you had to lay off because of the crisis, or at least replace them. So you have to bring your staff back up to speed in order to qualify for full forgiveness. Now, the PPP Flexibility Act doesn't change that requirement. It just changes the time frame that you have to do that. So the old rules, you have until June 30th, 2020 to rehire or replace your old employees. Now you have until December 31st, 2020, which gives you a much longer period of time to do that. This will help with competition between you and unemployment. So that's also a great news for, getting this loan forgiven for you. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about rehiring and replacing your employees, because if you don't rehire your employees, you're obviously going to get penalized in terms of forgiveness. But if you attempted to rehire your employees and then they decline, that will not count against you. So the key here is document the shit out of all of this stuff, paperwork, emails, anything that you can provide. So what I usually recommend is making an offer for your job, for your employees, your prior employees. Send them an email, offer them the job, and then be sure that they respond through email. So you have that documentation. You have a timestamp that tells you, you made the offer during the allowable period, and you have the response from the employee that they declined the offer, and that will not be counted against you in terms of forgiveness. If you have to replace the employee, then document your job ad, document any applications you received, document any interviews that you conducted. Interview notes are really helpful here. If none of them qualify, or if there was just no luck there, that documentation will also help you with not being penalized for not going back to your full staff from before the pandemic. The important thing that we're learning with the EIDL and the PPP is you have to keep really good records. I would over prepare and over record keep in order to make sure you pass any audits or anything that the SBA will impose on you or might impose on you. Just be over prepared for this. This is not something you want to mess around with, and because it can cost you a lot of money. And that's why companies hire us, to make sure we keep them on track and we consult with them and we help basically prepare forgiveness packages for people to make sure they are able to get the full amounts forgiven. Now, the original PPP loan was calculated based on 2.5 months of your 2019 payroll or your last 12 months payroll, whatever you picked. But it's basically 2.5 months of payroll plus benefits. That means now, with the covered period being 24 weeks, that's 3 months. That's plenty of time to get all your qualified expenses paid for with the PPP and to get it forgiven. So if you were on track already to meeting your 75% payroll requirement with the 8-week covered period, you're definitely gonna hit that with the new requirements. You might even be able to meet your PPP forgiveness with just payroll expenses now. Now, there is a caveat here with self-employed individuals, independent contractors, and owner employees. Even though the PPP Flexibility Act has extended your covered period from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, your owner compensation, your self-employed forgiveness amount is still capped at 8 weeks. That means that you still have to use the remainder of the funds on non-payroll qualified expenses, utilities, rents, transportation, all that crap. I think I understand why they did this. They want to make it easier for people. They didn't want to make it too easy. It kind of sucks, especially if you're self-employed. That the calculation for self-employed individuals from the old rules on the forgiveness calculation is 8 weeks of your 2019 net income, your line 31 on your Schedule C. So basically, you take your 2019 net income, divide it by 52, multiply it by 8. That's your maximum forgiveness amount for your PPP loan. Now, that's obviously capped at $100,000 net income. So that means that your maximum forgiveness amount for any self-employed person is $15,384. I was hoping that this PPP Flexibility Act would loosen that grip a little, would make it a little more flexible for self-employed folks or owner employees, but it doesn't look like that's going to be the case, which is really unfortunate. But it still is easier for you guys to get the loan forgiven, because now you have 24 weeks to spend the rest of the money on qualified expenses that are not payroll. Like I said, utilities, rent, interest, that kind of thing. This also means that you still can't give yourself a raise. If you're owner of an S corporation and you're paying yourself $40,000 a year in 2019, you can't suddenly pay yourself $50,000 a year to qualify for more forgiveness. It is still capped at your 2019 pay or $100,000 if your 2019 pay was over $100,000, whatever is less. So that's just something I wanted to share with you for my self-employed folks, is the calculation there for you will not change. Even though the covered period changes, you still have to cap your salary at 8 weeks. And same goes for owner employees. Your salary is capped at 8 weeks. And if you have family members that work for you as employees, keep in mind that they are also considered owner employees. So you can't funnel money to them and you can't increase their pay. If you had regular employees, you can give them raises, you can give them bonuses, but for yourself or your family members, you can't increase your pay. And I think that's just a safeguard that's put in there to prevent abuse of this program. That's all I got for today. Please be sure to smash that like button and hit that subscribe button